Hi, everybody. Thank you, Samir and Chris Hayes and Mike Lopez for the invitation. I trust everybody can see my screen. I'll begin by describing myself and then describe what the purpose of the webinar is, and then we'll dig right in. I'm a professional engineer by training, a chemical engineer in fact. I grew up professionally at Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada and had stints in Toyota Kentucky and New United Motor Company in Fremont, California, as well as Japanese sites. And I was lucky enough to work with very generous senseis, as the Japanese call them, and learn this business system that some people call lean, others have called the Toyota business system. My day job, if you will, is as a coach. I'm an executive coach for international organizations that are trying to implement the lean system, and our team works with companies around the world trying to teach folks what we were lucky enough to be taught. Our team is called Lean Pathways, and one of our goals is to disseminate this stuff, with generosity, and to that end we've got a bunch of stuff that we do that's available for free, so please do go to our website and I'll have links to that, and you can download templates in A3s and Lean Laughs, which is a cartoon, and I encourage you to join our blog. I think we've got 170,000 visits, and all the stuff that I talk about today is available at the blog. And we have very lively discussions there. And lastly, please feel free to join our LinkedIn group, which has several thousand members, and all the topics we talk about today are covered there. And of course, it's all free, and it's meant to grow a community of people that are studying and trying to get better and trying to interpret and apply these profound ideas. So. Our webinar today is entitled Lean Leadership and Ethics, and my purpose is as follows. I'd like to answer these three questions. First of all, what is the role of the leader in a transformation? Secondly, what is the leader's core methodology? And thirdly, I want to highlight what I see in my professional practice, a growing obstacle to sustained excellence. And as I have dug into this obstacle, it grows in importance, and I think in the years and decades to come, organizations are going to have to face it squarely and answer the challenge honestly if they're really going to sustain excellence. So let's begin at the beginning. The role of the leader is, first and foremost, to get business results. That is job one, and everything else is academic if we don't get business results. But how we get them is important. So the second element of the leader's role is that they must create capability, and specifically capability in the 4 M's: manpower, methods, machinery, and materials. We have to create management systems around the 4 M's. And of course, capability in people. As we'll see, the leader must be a sensei, one who has gone before, one who is committed to growing their people. But there is a third element of the leader's role, which usually gets short shrift. And later in the webinar, I'm going to dig into it. And the third element is to reinforce values. And people's immediate response is, huh, what? What's that got to do with anything? We're here to get business results. We're not a church. We're not a charity. We're here to get business results and make money. What does values have to do with it? And hopefully I can answer that question at least in part today. By the way, I tip my hat to the great Peter Drucker, who first articulated the leader's role in these ways in his classic book, The Practice of Management. So what is lean? What is this business system that has been so widely adopted, not just in manufacturing, but in healthcare, in universities, in public service, in financial institutions, insurance companies, and banks? Well, it is a business system that involves all employees. That's the first clue that this is different. All employees in the continuous pursuit of waste reduction and variation reduction. So waste and variation so as to achieve needed business results. So clearly it's about getting results, but in a different kind of a way. It's by getting results through total involvement. Now, you probably have seen this house before. This is an image that some companies use to describe the lean system. This is from a book called Lean Production Simplified by yours truly. I won't go into it in detail, but I will highlight the following point. The heart of the system is total involvement. Without total involvement, the house has no heat, it has no soul, it has no warmth. If I can use another metaphor, total involvement is the wind that fills the sail. And the lean system is a beautiful sailboat, but without the wind, it's not going to go anywhere. So total involvement, again, is a theme I'd like to emphasize. And we'll see why it is of overriding importance in today's economy and in the decades to come. How did we get here? I'm not going to give a detailed history lesson. I'll simply highlight some key points. The lean business system rests on the work and the shoulders of brilliant, brilliant people, and it goes back at least 120 years. The photograph on the left, on the far left, is Fred Taylor, an American boy, a Philadelphia boy, who in the 1880s and 90s essentially invented industrial engineering and applied the scientific method to the chaotic world of work. And he's as important in our day-to-day lives as arguably as Charles Darwin, who applied the scientific method to the chaotic world of biology. He's a very seminal person in our history. Henry Ford, no doubt you're familiar with. The next photograph, he applied Taylor's ideas to automotive manufacturing. 1908, they made the first Model T. By 1922, Ford was making 2 million per day. And famously, Henry kept cutting the cost and the price of the Model T while increasing the wages of his workers, showing the power of this system. And the next photo is Alfred P. Sloan, who showed how we might manage a multinational organization, and who looked at the core strategic questions in a very thoughtful way. Where are we going? How do we get there? When we are a massive organization with 5 or 6 divisions on all inhabited continents. The next photograph is W. Edwards Deming, who dedicated his life, among other things, to understanding variation and gave us PDCA and so many other great gifts. The next 2 photographs, Sakichi Toyota and Taiichi Ono, represent the Japanese contribution, and which was profound. And then Jim Womack and Dan Jones were the first ones to articulate what was different about this system that Toyota had taken to unprecedented heights. Let me say this. Something profound happened between 1946 and 52 in Japan. For one of the very few times in history, the best and the brightest from one great culture, the West and America, met the best and the brightest from another great culture, Japanese culture. And moreover, the Japanese were extraordinarily open to learning because General MacArthur had fired the top 10,000 leaders in Japan for obvious reasons. So the new generation was hungry to learn, and W. Edwards Deming, Peter Drucker, Homer Sarason, all the great senseis were eager to teach them. And in that crucible, in that 6-year period, something unique happened. And we call it lean now, and we're still learning how it works and how to deploy it in wider and wider applications. So it's something very different. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not a Johnny-come-lately. There is 120 years of history, and it's still evolving. Now, Question number 2, what is the leader's core methodology? The role of a leader is, as I described, get business results, reinforce values, and create capability. Now, how do we do that? What's our core methodology? I would argue that it is strategy deployment, or Hoshin Kanri in Japanese, which has been called the world's most powerful planning and execution system. And the reference there is Getting the Right Things Done, the Leader's Guide to Planning and Execution, which describes this system in great detail. I'll highlight some of the key points. First of all, we have to define purpose or policy. And I'm going to use a military metaphor simply because I think it's clear. By the way, if you're interested in strategy and understanding the development of strategic principles, I strongly recommend the military writers, beginning with Thucydides, Livy, the great Roman writer, Machiavelli, Karl von Clausewitz, the German theorist, all the way to the present. It's really profoundly interesting stuff and tends to be more interesting and more germane to our needs than, say, some of the academic work, which tends to be a bit turgid and kind of hard to get through. So, with that background, core concepts in strategy deployment. First, we must define purpose. So why are we fighting, if I may extend the military metaphor? Secondly, what's our strategy? When, where, and with what forces will we fight? And what are the specific objectives for each battle? And the third element is tactics. How will we fight a particular battle? So policy, strategy, and tactics is the hierarchy. So let me give you a concrete example. The D-Day invasion, June 6, 1944, is a textbook example of the flow and connection between these three things. So what's our policy? Remove Hitler from power, destroy the Nazi war machine. One of the great advantages the Allied armies had was absolute clarity of purpose. In fact, there were 2 words that described that purpose, and it was unconditional surrender. What was the strategy? Well, where will we fight? We will fight in Normandy. With what forces? The Canadian force on Juno Beach, the UK Army at Sword and Gold Beach, the US 4th Army at Omaha and Utah Beach. When will we fight? June the 6th. And in addition, General Eisenhower and his staff developed specific tactical objectives for each army. And I say objectives, not means. The tactical means, as we'll see, are the responsibility of the people on the ground. So tactics are determined by each army. So policy, strategy, and tactics is flow that informs strategy deployment. Now, another key difference between strategy deployment and the way too often we're taught in business school, and I hang my head and say that this is how I learned when I was in engineering and in business school, and I had to unlearn a lot of stuff when I got to Toyota. So what I was taught in business school was that it's all about selection. It's all about selecting the best plan, and selection depends on very smart people just like me. In MBA school, that's the underlying mental model we're taught. And deployment is an afterthought. I often call that, that last box on the flowchart that says implement, I often call that, and now miracles will happen. Instead, strategy deployment entails flipping that triangle upside down. Yes, of course, we spend time on selecting the plan and do good analysis, and we use all our MBA tools for that. We do 5-force analysis and SWOT analysis, and we identify our current markets, our target markets. We look at who the competitors are. We look at whether the markets are growing or sideways or shrinking, etc. Of course, we do all that good work, but that's 20% of it. Most of the effort goes into deployment, into translating our strategy into bite-sized tactics. If you will, we want to deploy, which means break the elephant down into bite-sized chunks and give each zone, each unit in the Army, if you will, part of that. And collectively, it adds up to something big. And here's a famous quote from the military. Any damn fool can make a plan. It's the execution. Okay, that seems fairly obvious, but in my coaching work, I see that it's almost constantly missed. So again, if we agree that deployment is the key and the focus of our activity, then total involvement becomes enormously important, because there are so many activities, so many tactics to carry out. If our people aren't engaged, we're not going to get anything done. The foundation of strategy deployment, our leader's core methodology, is Deming's plan, do, check, adjust cycle. And I'll give a high-level view of what PDCA looks like for the leader in the context of strategy deployment. The process is quote-unquote simple. Step 1, develop the plan. And that entails defining our policy, our purpose, if you will. In getting the right things done, I call it true north. Secondly, we have to answer the question, how are we going to get there? And that entails identifying what is preventing us. What breakthroughs do we need? I emphasize here that strategy deployment is about breakthrough. It's not about incremental improvement. We expect that. We have to run the business, and that entails getting better by 5% every year. But strategy is about breakthrough. It's about what will we emphasize to achieve 30, 40, 50% improvements. Secondly, we have to deploy the plan, and as I said, that entails breaking the elephant down into bite-sized chunks. And the process is called catchball, wherein we have critical conversations, if you will, level by level, and thereby effect that translation. I won't go into the methodology in detail. Again, it's in getting the right things done. And it's very helpful to have a key thinker or a deployment leader, or some companies call it a chief engineer, to enable that process. That's like the enzyme in a chemical reaction, which enables the deployment. Thirdly, we have to monitor the plan, develop the plan, deploy the plan, monitor the plan. And that entails level 1, level 2, level 3 checking, connected level 1 being the front line, level 2 being the folks they report to, and so on. And step 4 is improve the system. So develop the plan, deploy the plan, monitor the plan, improve the system. So let me dig into those in a little bit more detail. Again, this is point 2, the methodology of the leader. Now, before I dig into those 4 steps, I just want to highlight a subtlety here. There is an underlying way of thinking that informs the lean business system, and it comprises a set of what I call mental models. And a mental model is simply one's a picture of the world, one's the glasses that we see the world through, one's expectations, one's assumptions about how things work. So let me just highlight some key points thereby. So there is a set of tools that comprise lean, and they're elegant and simple. Quick die changeover, total productive maintenance, 5S, visual management, standardized work, and the like. And what we found in our coaching work is that often companies stop there, and very much it's like the wheel of fortune. You spin something, and whatever you come up with is what you implement. And usually you have a few months of improvement, maybe 6 months, and then we regress back to the mean because the tools are not connected to anything. So companies have realized that, and they said, you know, the tools are great, but they must be connected to one another and to a broader purpose. So that means a system. A system is a set of integrated tools with a clearly defined goal. So different organizations have developed their versions of the Toyota production system. There's the Ford production system, there's the Alcoa system, and so on and so forth. And that's an entirely reasonable thing to do. But what we found is that we don't achieve and sustain breakthrough unless we underlie the tools and the system with a way of thinking, and that comprises the mental models that I was talking about. And in the book, Getting the Right Things Done, I describe these in detail. There are 6, 8, or 10 core mental models that are fundamentally different. So I'm going to describe this core mental model of leadership. So in business school, I was taught that improvement comes from very smart people like me, quote unquote, developing fiendish plans and then telling other folks what to do. But the lean mental model around strategy deployment is fundamentally different. In fact, the leader's role is to be a sensei. So my job, if I'm a leader, is to develop capability, and it links very closely with Peter Drucker's thinking, which I described earlier. So the leader's job is to be a sensei, one who has gone before, to engage people through questions, Socratic method, and to build capability thereby. Okay, and that turns out to be critically important in strategy deployment. So here's how one of my senseis, Mr. Watanabe, summarized it. The leader's role is to practice and to teach PDCA. So I'm going to give you all a little bit of homework. Please reflect on that and answer the question, what are 5 implications for a leader's practice in that statement? If my role is to practice and teach PDCA, what does that mean for my work as a leader? Okay, that's a little bit of homework for you. So let's dig into the fundamentals of strategy deployment quite quickly here. So develop the plan. That entails defining purpose, as I said, identifying the obstacles, and then for each obstacle, developing a one-page strategy, which we call A3s, and that's because they are on A3 size paper, 11 by 17, and these are the currency of strategy deployment, if you will, and the enormous benefit is that if we all use the same money, so to speak, transactions happen very quickly. So an A3 is a one-page storyboard on 11 by 17-inch paper, and we call it A3 thinking because it's not about the form, rather it's about the story. And if we can boil a strategic question and problem down to one page, and the page is compelling and interesting, and people lean forward and say, yes, probably we have an understanding of the problem. If we can't, we don't. If we need 40 PowerPoint slides, we probably don't understand the problem. So here's an example of an A3, and again, I won't go into the details. I'll simply say that the left-hand side represents pain. This is where the shoe pinches. The right-hand side represents hope. And this is what I think we can do about it. And the driving force, the underlying algorithm, is the scientific method, PDCA, if you will. And at the bottom left, we articulate a hypothesis. If we do A, B, and C, we believe that D will happen. And in a sense, we're running an experiment, and thereby we learn more and more about our black box known as our business. So the flow, top left, what's a critical business need? What happened last year? The Japanese call this reflection or hansei. What's our grasp of the situation and our hypothesis? What's our action plan to implement our hypothesis? And finally, what can go wrong and how might we handle it? This is the structure of an A3. Now, step 2, as I said, is deploy the plan. Break it up into bite-sized chunks. We cannot tell people what to do, even though that's how we're trained often, but that's a Soviet model. Instead, we need to translate our plans and engage thereby. The mental model is what do you think, Socratic approach versus thou shalt. And the result is a tree diagram. So here's an example of what deployment looked like. So let's say our overall objective is hunger in Wisconsin. The next level entails 3 or 4 strategies that attack the biggest obstacles to achieving our goal. And deployment means translating level by level. So for example, at this level here, the focus will be hunger in Milwaukee. And at the next level, you know, in our zone here, we're going to reduce hunger among local school children. And in our team, in our neighborhood, our goal will be to provide hot lunches for kids in local schools. So that's a simple example of what deployment looks like. Things become increasingly granular as you get to the so-called front line. Okay. Step 3 in strategy deployment, monitor the plan, entails making problems visible. Making problems visible through simple connected check meetings. We call these level 1. So team huddles at level 1 in a factory or in a hospital or in, an insurance company. Target, actual, please explain. Every morning from 9 to 9:30, we go through our drill and we focus on, people, quality, delivery, cost, or strategic focus areas. And in each case, we ask, what's the target? What's actually happening? Is it red or green? What are our top 3 problems? What are we doing about them? And a key point is exception management. We ask, what are the hot spots? What are we doing about them? And so the meetings are quick. They're stand-up meetings. They're visual. You have a visual tool like a team board. And the underlying mental model here is that problems are gold. Treasure them. Problems are simply the system telling us where it hurts. It's whispering to us, hey, we got a problem over here. So, well, thank you very much for making the problem visible, And this is a drawing of connected checking. It is like a series of gears. So on the right-hand side, the front line, or level 1, connects to level 2. The folks they report to connects to level 3, senior leaders. And as you can see, that metrics become increasingly more concrete as you get to the front line. And again, the things that we're making visible, top 3 acute problems, top 3 chronic problems. Each zone owns their problems. If they can't fix the problem, they don't have the span of control, they pull in the higher level for help, but you still own your problem. And step 4, improve the system, fundamentally entails problem solving. And it's important to have a core algorithm that is widely shared. So again, we're speaking the same language, and you can see the algorithm that we use and we found to be very effective. Do I have a problem? What's the target? What's the actual? What's the actual? What's the ideal? Do I know the cause? What's the point of cause? What's the direct cause? What's the root cause? Have I proven cause and effect? What experiments will I run? And step 4, have I confirmed the countermeasure? How will I lock in the countermeasure? Standard work, visual management. Will we have a run chart on our team board? Will I work it into my personal standard work to ensure that 6 months from now we're still doing it? These are all elements of improving the system. And the algorithm applies at level 1, in other words, the front line. You have many small problems. At level 2, where you tend to have the medium-sized problems. And at level 3, the very few but very big systemic problems. Okay, so the algorithm applies at level 1, which we call point Kaizen, level 2, flow Kaizen, and level 3, system Kaizen. Okay, point, flow, and system Kaizen are all informed by that algorithm I described. So that's a summary of strategy deployment, our leaders' core methodology. And I trust that's clear to everybody. And again, the book Getting the Right Things Done describes this in great detail. Again, develop the plan, deploy the plan, monitor the plan, improve the system. It's quote-unquote simple, the way hitting a golf ball is simple. So now let's reiterate the role of the leader. Get business results, job 1. Create capability in the 4 M's, manpower, methods, materials, and machinery. And this third one here, which, as I said, gets short shrift. Reinforce values. Huh? Really? Is that important? I mean, really, reinforce values? We're here to make money. Isn't business an amoral kind of a thing? It's just about, meeting financial results every quarter and satisfying the shareholders, is it not? Well, maybe there's more to it than that. We are in a proverbial knowledge economy, and that's a cliche. Let's see if we can make it concrete. What's the market cap of knowledge sector companies? Let's have a peek here. Whoa. 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 What portion of, say, Apple's market capitalization is physical and financial capital, the traditional measures? Quite a small portion, is it not? Even in manufacturing. Let's see what knowledge economy means. So Toyota and GM are fundamentally similar, roughly the same number of plants, same amount of footprint, distribution centers, dealers, inventory, etc. Toyota has some more cash on hand, but look at the difference in market capitalization, almost 120 billion more. What makes up the difference? It's not, in Toyota's case, just cash. It's something else. And similarly, Apple is worth almost three times what Toyota's worth. What does that mean? So something else is happening here. Our traditional economics and finance is not capturing some fundamental things, and hence the concept of intellectual capital. What is intellectual capital? Well, here are definitions that I pulled off the web. Collective knowledge of individuals in an organization that is used to produce wealth. It's now considered to be an asset because investment in people is no different than investment in machines and factories. And I remember back to my Toyota days when I was taught that we are not building cars here, we are building people. So the great senseis intuited this a long time ago. But now the finance and accounting communities are starting to catch up. And in the next 10 years, I think they're going to answer the question, what is intellectual capital? How do you account for it? And generally accepted accounting principles are going to change. And in fact, you can look at the assets of an organization in terms of this tree. So at the top here, 100% of our assets, and they comprise some percentage of financial assets, physical assets, and intellectual capital. And it turns out that intellectual capital has three components: human capital, organizational capital, and relational capital. And in our practice, we seek to make these concrete, working with senior management teams, so that we have a shared understanding, A, of how our assets are distributed, and B, do our assets support our value-creating logic? Do we have the horsepower, if you will, to sustain a strategy, our value-creating logic, so that we're prosperous in the future? So let me just dig in a little bit to human capital, knowledge and capability, right? Obviously. Problem-solving capability, creativity, flexibility, urgency, all of those are components of human capability, of human capital. Organizational capital, most obviously that comprises intellectual property, but more so organizational processes. A company like Toyota, for example, our old Toyota plant, was extremely good at strategy deployment. So within a few days, a $4 billion company could define purpose and focus areas and begin to develop hypotheses for blasting obstacles out of the way. Within a couple of days, it's a huge advantage. Reputation and brand are obvious elements of organizational capital. Consumer goods companies like Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark invest enormously in building their brand. A well-respected company like a Becton Dickinson, its reputation is worth enormous amounts of money as well, because as they build new plants and launch new products, they have much less hassle because everybody's happy to see them. Okay, and under relational capital, so relationships with customers are valuable, with suppliers and market partners. These are valuable because they allow you to create products, create partnerships, create value streams that can very quickly translate into financial and physical assets. So I won't go into these in great detail. I just want to highlight that there is a lot to intellectual capital, and intellectual capital comprises the bulk of the value of knowledge companies and of companies like Toyota. Obviously, a big element of Toyota's capital, the intellectual capital, is the Toyota production system, and people recognize that in the market cap. We've done this analysis with senior management teams in consumer goods, in the power industry, in healthcare. And the consensus is, yes, intellectual capital is not just big, but often it's more important and is more valuable than our physical and financial assets. And the financial and economics community is catching up and doing very good work in that area. Now, so what? You say, well, that's fine, Pascal. But here's the key point. What is different about human capital? Unlike other forms of capital like machines or a financial instrument, a bond or something, human capital can choose not to deploy. They can choose not to deploy, and that's a fundamentally different thing from, as I say, a machine or a bond. Now, why would somebody choose not to deploy their knowledge and capability, their creativity, their experience, their problem-solving capability? Well, here are some of the biggest reasons why, and I'll dig into them in a moment. Right? Gary Hamel had a very good paper in Harvard Business Review recently called "The Core Incompetencies of the Organization," and he talked about the dreadfully low levels of engagement and why? Well, because organizations are often inert, they're emotionally insipid, the purpose is unclear, and often managers behave in disgraceful ways, and you can probably think of others as well. So how engaged is today's workforce? Well, recently Gallup a review, as they do every year. It's called "The State of the Global Workplace." Here's what they found, and the results are stunning in a bad way. 13% of employees are engaged in their work. 13%, folks. Can you imagine if we had a machine in our factory that was operating at an OEE of 13%? We'd be out of business pretty soon, wouldn't we? A small minority of employees rate executives high on ethics. So some reflection points. Has business ethics deteriorated? Have society standards of behavior changed? Or is the media reporting ethical problems more vigorously? So this brings us back to Drucker's point 3. The leader's role includes reinforcing values. Why is this important? The heart of Lean, as we said earlier, is total involvement. And human capital can choose not to deploy. Moreover, by 2025, millennials will comprise the bulk of the workforce, and their values are as follows. What do they expect of employers? Ethical behavior. They feel that employers have a moral obligation to do good, but to address global problems. They also want independence in work. They want a commitment to innovation. Right? Does that ring a bell? Is it relevant to what we talked about earlier in the leader as a teacher? And this is, as I say, a recent Deloitte Tomatsu survey. So therefore, ethics is of overriding importance nowadays. And Drucker's third point, reinforcing values, will become increasingly important. So what is ethics? Well, it's derived from a Greek word which means a code of conduct. And it's a study of right and wrong, fundamentally. And this gives us comfort in the Lean community because we're taught target actual, binary standards. It's good, it's no good. It's green or it's red. So can we integrate ethics into our vocabulary, into our practice? Okay. So here is the ethics process, if you will. It begins with character, then there's an action, and then there's a standard of some kind. And the standard tells us it's okay, not okay. Okay? That's the fundamental process, very simple. And some key questions are, what is the right standard? And I won't have time to dig into these questions, but I do want to pose them, and perhaps in a follow-up webinar we can dig in greater detail. Another question of central importance for, say, human resources is, what is good character? How do we develop it? How do we recruit for it? How do we promote? How do we strengthen our bench, etc.? Okay? So where do we start? In my personal practice, in my executive coaching, I see a growing need, as I said, because of the alienation in the workforce and thereby the inability of our organizations to achieve and sustain a breakthrough, because you need total involvement. You need hearts and minds, and people have to feel very, very good about what they're doing and have to be committed to the long term. So where do we start with respect to values? Well, in my research, I found the great virtues are a great place to start. There are ancient virtues defined by the Stoic philosophers Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. And there's a wonderful book by André Comte-Sponville called A Small Treatise on the Great Virtues, which highlights these. And the most fundamental of the great virtues are the cardinal virtues, temperance, prudence, courage, and justice. And again, we don't have time to dig into these in detail, but I'll give you a little bit of homework if I may, and perhaps we can take it up at a follow-up webinar. Please define the cardinal virtues. What does prudence, temperance, courage, and justice mean to you? And if possible, draw a picture, okay? Try to use pictures as opposed to words that engages the right side of your brain. And this is a bonus question. How do the cardinal virtues relate to PDCA? In fact, in our practice, they find they are extremely relevant and drive PDCA in important ways. And one more bonus question. How do they relate to intellectual capital? Okay, that's your homework. Here is a modern incarnation of the great virtues. This, of course, is John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And John Wooden is one of my heroes. He was the coach of the UCLA Bruins basketball team that won, I think it was 11 or 12 NCAA championships, and he's a revered sensei. He passed a few years ago at the age of 101, I think. So he's one who understood the importance of values and ethics and really made that the foundation of his pyramid of success. So I'll leave you with this image. What you do is what you get. It's the water ring model of leadership. If we can strengthen our character, if we can build ethics into our organization, very good things will happen. In fact, they'll be multiplied 10 times. So in summary, what's the role of the leader? Maybe you can answer that question as part of your homework. What's the core methodology? So again, more homework. What are the 4 steps in strategy deployment? And what do we do about this growing obstacle to sustained excellence? What's the countermeasure? Perhaps in a follow-up countermeasure. Please feel free to email me. Here's my email address. These books here dig into these topics in greater detail. The one on the left is about strategy deployment. The book on the right, Reflections, is basically a storybook. It's my adventures the past 20 years in as an executive coach, and it's got discussions of ethics and the role of ethics in leadership. And lastly, please do feel free to join the blog and join the LinkedIn group and partake in the free downloads, the free cartoons that we make available. Please join our community and contribute. With that, perhaps I'll pass the baton to Samir, and perhaps we can have some questions.
Okay, thank you, Pascal. And a couple of things, logistics related, is we have a few requests. If you can share the presentation to the users, and answer to that is Pascal's email is on the slide. Please feel free to reach out to him, and he can share that with you. Again, we are open for questions. If you have questions, please feel free to comment or question in the chat window. I will go through all the questions. I will consolidate if necessary. Otherwise, I'll just ask them as is, and we have questions flowing in. And yeah, one more thing. I also had a couple of questions about the webinar. As I said in the beginning of the webinar will be recorded and will be made available on ASQ Lean Enterprise Division website in about 10 days. The website is asq.org/LE, which stands for Lean Enterprise.
If I can
Go
interrupt
ahead.
for, let me interrupt for just a moment, folks. Feel free to email me with questions and stuff. I'm refining the materials. As I said, this is an ongoing area of development, so I'm refining the materials. And I will post the deck that you can download once we refine them, though, and they're in better shape. So it won't be too long, maybe a couple of weeks. So you don't. By all means, contact me and ask questions and stuff, but no need to ask for the materials because we will post them subsequently. Sorry, Simon,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Sure. No problem. All right. So first question is the Gemba walk effective in the service sector?
Yeah, the Gemba walks they inform all four steps in strategy deployment. In developing the plan, we need to go to the Gemba to understand what's happening. So to grasp the situation, you have to have a regular routine wherein you're in the Gemba. So if you are a leader of a site, a factory, for example, and you've got 4 or 5 zones, your personal leader standard work should entail touching each zone on some frequency and having a set of questions, a set learning points for each visit. So Mondays stamping, Tuesdays welding, Wednesdays paint, Thursday plastics, Friday assembly. And here are the things that I want to emphasize. I want to see how good their team huddles are. Have they made the top 3 problems visible? How good is the problem-solving technique? How can I support the team? That kind of stuff. So it's part of develop the plan. It's also a big part of monitor the plan. So if we've built our checking systems and we've got level 1, level 2, level 3 team huddles, it's important for the leader to attend the huddles. And the huddles, of course, should be in the Gemba, in the shop floor or the design studio or the retail outlet or wherever the work is in value is being created. And of course, in improve the system, part of Gemba work and leader standard work, as I said, is answering the question: how good is our team's problem-solving technique? You know, what are the weak areas? How can I strengthen those? So yes, Gemba work is central.
Okay, thank you. Another question: in your coaching, do you often use the theory of constraints to pick up the project?
Theory of constraints is very useful. And it's one of the core arrows in the quiver, if you will. So yeah, it's fundamentally sound stuff. It's good stuff. I'm a fan of Ellie Goldratt's books. So yes, by all means, we pull in what we need to achieve the business result. I should emphasize, I'm an agnostic when it comes to acronyms and the kind of theological debates that you often get. Well, it's theory of constraints versus business process for engineering versus TQM. Folks, it's all true. All roads lead to Rome. What's of interest to me is how do we get business results? How do we reinforce capability? How do we reinforce our values? And an important quiver in that, theory of constraints and a business process for engineering is also very helpful, etc. So let's avoid theology and focus on on the problem.
Again, we are open for questions. Please feel free to ask questions in the questions window. We have a next question here: how to go to the Gemba in the geographically distributed team?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's common in large multinational companies. So one useful technique is to build your leader standard work in such a way that you can touch as many zones, even if they're geographically distributed, in a reasonable way. So you start building your leader standard work at the beginning of the year, or even before the beginning of the year. And for example, if you've got 4 factories in Asia and you want to touch each factory X number of times, you need to calendarize in advance. And another important thing to do is to develop your personal standard work for your Gemba walks so that you're much more effective. So if you're in, I don't know, you're in Singapore and you have 3 sites to see there, your personal standard work is such that you can maximize the impact and meet your objectives, making friends, reinforcing values, highlighting key strategic initiatives or what have you, much more effectively. So leader standard work is the key. Now, a second enabler is to use technology intelligently. There's no one best way. I don't know of a best practice with respect to attending, say, level 1 or level 2 team huddles when you're in New York City and the team is in Curitiba in Brazil. But you, run experiments and figure out what works for you. I know of companies that use fairly low-tech, video cameras, video scans, or Skype, and they're able to have a meaningful meeting. You don't have to invest in some of these enormously expensive systems. There's no one best way in my experience. You'll have to run experiments. The key point is you want to satisfy the visual management triangle. We see together, we know together, we act together.
Thank you. So next question is, does the deployment of Lean in the organization require shifting from command and control leadership approach?
Yes, it does, of course. As I said, in order to achieve excellence and sustain excellence, you must have total involvement. You must have total involvement. You cannot achieve what Apple has achieved, or Amazon, or Toyota for that matter, Becton Dickinson, any great company, without total involvement. So if your approach and if our mental model is command and control, and again, many of us, myself included, are taught in that way, we're going to, at the very least, sub-optimize, but at worst, we could alienate our team, and very capable people, as I said earlier, will choose not to deploy their knowledge, their experience, their problem-solving ability, their flexibility, their sense of urgency. So yeah, it's a fundamentally different way of managing, and it's, as I say, it's a clear and present danger. 13% of people are engaged in their work. That's an astonishing number. 13%. I mean, I think 10, 20 years from now, we'll look back on how we manage now, and we'll say, "Holy cow! Did they not know that total involvement is the key?"
Thank you. The next question is, what's the time for Gemba and for how long? 30 minutes, 1 hour, or more?
Well, I think we have to ask what's the purpose of the Gemba. So normally a typical example of purposes, my purpose is I'm going to go to I'm going to touch each of my 5 zones once a week, and the purpose is to understand what their current condition is, to reinforce strategic priorities, and to do some coaching. So that's the purpose. Then you define your personal standard work, the sequence of events that you'll do to affect that purpose. Typically an hour, I think, is plenty of time to achieve that kind of a purpose. You want to be effective and efficient with your time, because leaders have multiple zones to touch, and it's demoralizing if you're just milling around, because people have work to do. So if you take 2 or 3 hours out of a zone leader's time, that's not really respectful of their time. So be focused, be professional, be concise. Less is more as a general rule.
All right, thank you. The next question is, in your opinion, can Gemba work be done virtually?
No.
Okay. How do you account for ethics when dealing with multiple cultures whose ethics may not be the same?
That's a superb question, and let me just highlight the key question here. So the question we have to answer, and this is very important for leaders and for human resources: what is the right standard? So as you say, all cultures, not all cultures have the same standards. So we have to understand the cultures we're working in, and we have to craft a set of standards that makes sense, that reinforces what's important to us and respects the existing culture. So perhaps in a follow-up webinar we can talk about those things, but that's the key question. What is the right standard? Here are some examples of standards that organizations use. One standard, which is a very low standard, is the legal standard. I'm just going to follow the law. But again, millennials in particular and the public in general is saying to us, that's not enough. We expect more from you. So another standard is professional standards. I'm a professional engineer. I have a code of ethics. Is that acceptable? Possibly. And as our questioner suggests, there are other standards. There are standards people pick up in their family, or in their schooling, or their religious standards. So the question, what is the right standard, is central to the ethics process, and it's one that we'll have to wrestle with in the years to come. Very good question.
Thank you. Sir, just to give, I know some people are leaving, and this is actually the official end of the webinar. So if I understand, if you have to leave, and we have overwhelming feedback on people like the presentation and the webinar. So thank you, Pascal. And we are going to continue a few more minutes. I see some questions in the queue, and this will be recorded until the end. So if you have to go and attend a meeting and then want to listen back later for more questions, you're welcome to. So being said that, again, the webinar is officially ended. Feel free to leave if you have to, and I'm going to actually go back to our question window here, and I'm going to present the next question. Actually, this is a little clarification about the work. The geographically distributed team is the user is asking, geographically distributed mean like 7 people in India, like 2 people in Canada, 1 person in US. In that case, how do you apply Gemba, or it does not apply, like Gemba walks?
In that case, I don't know if I don't think you can do a Gemba walk per se. What you can do is have an effective check meeting. You can have an effective team huddle, whether it's level 1, level 2, or level 3. And to do that, as I say, you'll have to run experiments that satisfy the visual management triangle. We see together, so that could mean maybe you have a shared screen, as we're saying here. Maybe you use video cameras and Skype, so that if I'm standing at a team board in Delhi and presenting out our design of this or that product or process, we use the video, and we can show the maybe go on a virtual walk and show the part and say, look, here's what it looks like. Can you see here we've got a special groove, and here we're changing the position of the SMT, and here the wiring is a little bit different. So again, experiment with technology to satisfy the visual management triangle. We see together, we know together, we act together. So again, you're limited only by your creativity. There's no one best way, and there's no one best practice. But try to satisfy that visual management triangle.
All right, thank you. Another question is, what is the best way to sustain the achievements?
Well, excellent question. Some of the immediate activities are lock-in improvements with visual management and standardized work. Reinforce it through your personal leader standard work. So as you do your rounds in zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, commend people, thank them, reinforce the standard. In the longer term, sustaining achievement, though, entails being very sensitive to the intellectual capital of your organization, to the human capital, and so on, and managing it in an intelligent way. And in a future session, we can talk about how you grow and how you manage intellectual capital. How do you motivate people to want to sustain improvement? And again, 13% of people are engaged and motivated in international companies. That's Gallup. I mean, it's not made up stuff. It's Gallup's detailed poll, and people are shaking their heads. So how can we raise that number in our organizations? Because otherwise it's hard to sustain anything. I mean, it's hard to sustain a good condition, let alone a great achievement. So these are questions we have to think about very carefully as leaders.
Thank you. Another question is, how do you develop character on your employees?
Excellent. Another excellent question. Before I answer it, let me say that in the years to come, the human resources will be increasingly important, and we have to raise our game in human resources. We have to become, if I can use a sports, we have to become like the director of player personnel for a great baseball team or a great football team. You know, those people understand, for a baseball team, say the Boston Red Sox, they understand how good's our pitching, how good's our outfielders, how good is our bench, how good is our farm system, you know, what lacks do we have on our team? Well, we don't have any left-hand pitchers, so we have to develop left-hand pitching. So we have to raise our game in human resources so that we're thinking in those terms. And human resources, Jack Welch, the great Jack Welch argues, is the most important group. Therefore, now it's not always treated as such, and often people, you know, shun human resources and say, oh, well, they're not that important, you know, they're not doing the most important work. But we have to raise that that group and our activity. Anyhow, to get back to the question, so how do you develop good character? First of all, we have to define what is good character, a brief definition is as follows. Good character is A, self-control, and B, consideration for others. Self-control, consideration for others. And if we dig into those, there are a bunch of other implications of those two statements. So first we define what is good character. Secondly, in our recruitment processes, we have to screen for it. Okay? And that is a big advantage. And certainly Toyota is very good at that kind of stuff. Many companies are getting much, much better. Now, again, thinking of HR processes, our capability building, our orientation processes should answer the question, how do we build good character? So part of it is defining core values, core standards in the organization, giving people courses and training and practical coaching. Certainly a big part of the leader's job, according to Peter Drucker, is to reinforce those values. And how? In your Gemba walks, in your leader standard work. And thereby people start to relax. They say, yes, I feel good about what this company is about. I'm treated with respect. I believe in what we're trying to do. I'm going to do extra. I'm going to commit myself to this breakthrough or to that noble goal. You know, and you see it in great companies. I don't want to suggest that this doesn't exist in companies. It does. We do have a growing number of terrific companies that have ethics and character at their heart. My point is we're going to have to do much better across the board if we're going to sustain excellence.
All right. This is probably the last question here, and we have a bunch of more thank you, and the user like the presentation comments for you here, Pascal.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you so much for coming. And as I say, I will post the materials. I'm just going to clean them up a little bit more, and you all will have access to them.
Okay. How do you engage everyone without losing control and avoiding sub-optimization or sub-optimizing?
Yes, how do we engage everybody? So how do we
without
engage everybody
without losing your control and sub-optimizing or sub-optimization?
Yeah. Well, so it is a risk initially to say, well, gee, if I engage everybody, will it just be chaos? Well, we have to remember that our core process contains many checkpoints. Let me see if I can find that slide again. So our core process, the core methodology of the leader is develop the plan, deploy the plan, monitor the plan, improve the system. Within those 4 steps, there are ample opportunities to guide the discussion, to ensure that it's connecting with purpose, to ensure that we're not off in outer space or off on some tangent. So in particular in the monitor the plan phase, so we have ample opportunities to check and adjust what folks are doing. Not to control them. We don't want to control them. We just want to guide them. The image that I have is that strategy deployment is like a river finding its way to the sea. So our job as leaders is to define the banks of the river and to define where the sea is. The sea is our purpose. And then let the water go. So it's going to slosh a bit left, slosh a bit right, but the banks of the river will continue to guide it toward the sea. And that takes great skill as a leader, but that's why we need good leaders.
All right. So thank you again, Pascal. I think that brings us to the end of the presentation and end of the question answer. And once again, on behalf of ASQ Lean Enterprise Division and Lean Enterprise Division's webinar committee, I want to thank you for your time for such a great presentation. As I said, the presentation is still being recorded, and once we complete the presentation, it will be posted within 10 days, and as well as material which was presented today. So thank you all. Thank you, Pascal, and we are going to shut it down. Thank you.
Thank you all for the invitation, and thanks for listening, folks.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.